Welcome to the Psychology World podcast with me, Connor Whiteley, psychology student and international best-selling psychology author of over 30 psychology books, bringing you the latest psychology news, fascinating psychology topics and more each week. If you want to learn more, then please check out connorwhiteley.net/books. And don't forget to like and subscribe to the YouTube video or follow on your favourite podcast app. And here's the show. Hi everyone and welcome to episode 325 of the Psychology World podcast with me, Con Whiteley. And today's episode is on how to overcome infidelity and rebuild trust. And it is Monday the 2nd of June 2025 as I record this. And today's podcast episode is a really good one because infidelity podcast episodes always tend to do really well. So originally I wrote this back in March 2024 and it was on the podcast episodes that I just did like for fun, and I actually haven't produced it since. But now I actually am, because my life sort of just imploded last week and I got really busy, really overwhelmed, and so many bits and pieces that I did not have time to write a podcast episode from scratch. So this is why you always have backup content. So during today's podcast episode, you're going to learn about the 3 reasons why this actually applies to psychology, but you're also going to look at the really important reasons and some of the unofficial tips and tricks that I have to actually help you overcome infidelity and rebuild trust in your relationship. But the thing about infidelity is that it's a massive betrayal. It can lead to anger, shock, horror, sadness, grief, and a whole bunch of other emotions. But it is possible for a couple to overcome these feelings, rebuild trust in their relationship, and go back to having a strong, healthy relationship, given enough time, focus, and some of these tips and tricks. So if you've experienced infidelity, or if you simply want to learn more about it, then this is going to be a great podcast episode for you. And as a aspiring or qualified psychologist, this is another valuable podcast episode for you, because there will be times when a client comes in to our therapy room, which is where they've experienced infidelity, and this could be the main reason or one of the maintaining factors of their mental health condition. So it's always useful to gain a bit more perspective, insight, and a few ways to possibly help them. So you got that to look forward to in the content part of today's episode. So moving on to the psychology news section, we're reading from the British Psychological Society Research Digest, and the first one is: Mind nose might actually be a thing. If I asked you to conjure an image of a slice of lemon in your mind, could you do it? Then, if I asked you to imagine its scent, it's widely accepted that most people are capable of picturing an object in their mind, as well as imagining sounds and the movements of objects, by the authors of a new study in the Journal of Experimental Psychology, Human Perception and Performance. However, open quote, there is a seemingly wide belief amongst olfactory researchers that the human ability to imagine odours might be severely limited or even non-existent. Close quote. The new research contradicts this belief. In fact, the ability to imagine a wide range of specific scents seems to be common. Okay, so that is actually quite a good one, because I can see where they're coming from. Like, off the top of my head, I don't think I'm that great at imagining smells, but equally, there are certain smells which you will never really be able to forget. For example, the smell of bleach. A really random one, but I quite like the smell of bleach. And then there's some other really common ones that are really powerful. For example, the smell of mint, freshly cut grass, grapes, no, not grapes, sorry, lemons, oranges, and a few other ones. So it's definitely useful, and I definitely think that there needs to be some more research because the more evidence we have to contradict this claim, the better. And then I'll be interested to actually see what are the implications, what are the practical implications of this finding. Because if we can imagine odors in our minds, so what? So what? I'm not really sure how this can be applied to everyday life, but I guess that there could be some clinical implications because I know there's a condition which is where you can't imagine stuff in your mind's eye. So it'd be interesting to see if there's another one or if there's another condition and that actually means that you can't imagine odors and if that could further help our understanding of a human perception and how we perceive the world around us. So, just some food for thought. So, the next one is the gateway to conscious perception. We all have an innate sense of what it feels like to be conscious. Explaining exactly what consciousness is, or being able to point to the mechanism that underpins it, however, is a totally different ballgame. In part, this is because of ineffectability. It's proven extremely difficult to study. A recent paper, however, offers some rare progress, looking beyond the cerebral cortex, which has been the focus of the lion's share of consciousness research in cognitive disciplines to date. A new study in Science reveals that specific regions of the underlying thalamus have a crucial role to play in negating what rises to conscious perception. Okay, so my partner would absolutely love this research, and I've actually got to send this to them later on because they would find it really interesting. Interesting consciousness. I mean, it's something that I just do not play around with much because I don't, I don't know. I really don't know why I actually don't pay attention to it more. Partly because, as one of my lecturers said, and he's done some stuff in consciousness, it's just so hard to study, and there's more interesting stuff, and that we can actually try it, that we can actually try and understand. And that's like his a opinion, but consciousness, like how we experience the world, what leads us to do certain perceptions that what actually makes us feel more conscious. That is fascinating. It's a really important question. It's just it's just that we've actually got to study it more though, and hopefully as technology improves, we should be able to get a better. But it's brilliant that there is a recent paper that has made some rare progress. So, well done, the researchers. There's not more that I can actually say about this. So the last one is a new treatment for ADHD may be on the horizon in the form of a familiar blood medication. New evidence from a recent paper in psychopharmacology suggests that amopine, which, sorry, I've completely butchered that pronunciation, which is regularly prescribed for high blood pressure, might help to manage common symptoms of ADHD whilst avoiding some of the potential undesirable effects of current treatment offerings. Okay, now this is really useful, Jonah, because my housemate has ADHD, my partner has ADHD, and both of them are unmedicated just because I didn't realise this. But in the UK, the NHS covers ADHD medication until you're 18. After that, they don't, which to me is just ridiculous. Like, just beyond ridiculous, because you've still got ADHD when you're an adult. It's still going to impact your life. It's still going to impact your university, your ability to work, etc. So the whole idea that just because you're 18, they stop supplying you with the medication that helps you function and helps you thrive is just beyond ridiculous to me. But anyway, that's not the point of this psychology article. The actual point is that there's a new like a medication which could help overcome some of the undesirable side effects. Now this is useful because I am flat out against medication for most mental health conditions, except ADHD, because I know from different people that it can be really useful, and there does seem to be a much better research base compared to antidepressants. The only point that I will raise about this article is that is is that if this drug is regularly prescribed for people with high blood pressure, then that is a weird one because does it mean that there's a link between ADHD and your blood pressure? If so, I think that should be investigated. But another thing which is a bit unusual about this is normally, from what I remember, though don't quote me on this, but the reason why ADHD drugs you should not be taking unless you have ADHD is because they're targeted and they really help you to focus. And if you don't have ADHD and you actually take the medication, it has really undesirable side effects. So now I'm wondering, why is it that this blood pressure medication is useful for people with ADHD? So, by just some food for thought, and because this podcast episode is already quite late coming out, I'm going to cut it there and move on to the personal update. So, we're moving on to the personal update. This week has been really weird and really sort of not ideal because I was really burnt out. I was burnt out for a lot of different reasons. Partly because I suddenly had a lot of university work to do. I had some quite big projects that I was working on, and turns out that because they were just so big and they were taking a lot longer than I thought, it actually worn me out. And then there was house stuff, to be honest, which led me quite burnt out though. But I did learn a good few things though, including what I call the stress pot exercise, which is where you literally draw down a little pot in the middle of a page and you write outside it all the different stresses in your life. And that's actually quite good though, because it's very visual, and then you can actually think about, right, how am I going to reduce these stresses in my life? So I had a brilliant cleanup week, which annihilated quite a few stresses in my life. I'm having one more week of cleaning up and catching up with different bits and pieces. Partly this is one of the reasons why the podcast is, I'm recording it Monday morning when it should have been out quite a few hours ago. So apologies. And then on Saturday, I was playing games with my friends, and then yesterday, I was out in London with my parents. Now, if you ever want to see a brilliant play in London, the comedy about spies, or to be honest, anything done by Mischief, like the play that goes wrong, is absolutely brilliant. It's an amazing a theatre group. I love them. They're really funny. They're really clever, and it's just such a brilliant few hours out. I really do recommend it. And then I also went to this really interesting restaurant for lunch, which basically allows you to cook your own steak over a really really hot, hot stone. So that was a lot of fun. It was just something different, to be honest, and it was just really nice. Personally, I don't like a steak, but cooking it this way, where I could cook it myself, was a lot of fun. And it's just an experience which you're never going to have again. So I really do recommend it. And then in other news, I've been working on my dissertation. One of the reasons why I got so overwhelmed and I got burnt out last week was because I basically had to re-look at my dissertation to finalise it and start doing in improvements because I did it over a year ago. I've not submitted it yet because I've done like other studies since, and I basically started it when I was still full time and not part time. So one of the reasons was just that I was quite nervous about just how much I was going to have to redo it. Like that was my biggest fear, that I would just have to like scrap it all and just redo it because of how bad it was in like my mind. Thankfully, it was actually really good. So I've had to add like a few paragraphs to help make the introduction better, but it was really good. Well, good though. So it's not going to be as overwhelming or as awful as I thought it was like going to be. So it makes it a lot more manageable. And then a whole bunch of other things have been like happening too, but none of them have been psychology related. So, as always, I always love to hear your thoughts and feelings on today's episode. You can always email me, connorwhiteley@connorwhiteley.net. You can always leave a comment out of the show notes at connorwhiteley.net/podcast, and you can always tweet me on Twitter at sci-fi whiteley. I always love to hear from all of you because it really helps make the podcast feel more like a conversation. And always feel free to send pictures of where you're listening in from. I always love to see where all of you are from all over the world. And today's episode has been sponsored by Psychology of Relationships, the social psychology of friendships, romantic relationships, and more. So this is a great sponsor for today's episode because Infidelity is all about romantic relationships. So by the end of this great, really easy to understand book, you'll be able to understand what the biological, psychological, and the social reasons why relationships form. So this applies to romantic relationships, but also friendships too. And then we also talk about communication, which is flat out critical in all of relationships. So it's interesting to see some of the psychological theories behind that. And to be honest, truth be told, I still use some of those theories nowadays when I'm trying to form relationships, which is actually quite funny looking back. But this is the thing that I love about psychology. You can apply it to your everyday life, of course, in like subtle ways, and you've got to adapt it slightly, but it is really useful. And then we also talk about prosocial behaviour, like the bystanderism, altruism, why do people show a prosocial behaviour, and so many other great facets of human behaviour, which I flat out love. So this book's brilliant, it's a lot of fun, I really do recommend it. So if you want to understand more about the social psychology of relationships and the friendships, then definitely check out Psychology of Relationships. Available at all major ebook retailers, and you can order the paperback and hardback version from Amazon, your local bookstore or local library if you request it. And if you want the audiobook narrated by artificial intelligence, then now you can. At selected audiobook retailers like Spotify, Kobo, Google Play, Barnes & Noble, and selected library systems like Biblioteca, Overdrive, and Baker and Taylor. So, whilst buying books helps to support the creation and the editing of the podcast, my time is sponsored by my wonderful patrons. And as always, a massive thank you to my patrons, because your support shows that you like the show and you want it to continue. So, if you wanted to become a patron of the show and get access to tons of great rewards, now you can at patreon.com/the Psychology World podcast, and you'll get lots of great benefits like over 60 exclusive blog posts which won't be made into podcast episodes for weeks, months, or even years, knowing me. And you'll get a closer relationship between me as a podcast creator and you as a listener. So that's patreon.com/the Psychology World podcast. Or if you want to support the podcast on a one-off basis, then please head on over to buymeacoffee.com/Connor Whiteley. So that's enough of the personal update. Let's move on to the content part of today's episode. So moving on to the content part of today's episode. So we're going to be talking about how to overcome infidelity and rebuild trust. So it's a great episode, so let's dive into it. So why am I talking about infidelity on a psychology podcast? So I'm mainly talking about this on the Psychology World podcast, a podcast mainly dedicated to aspiring and qualified psychologists for three main reasons. Firstly, infidelity is a behaviour, and psychology covers all of human behaviour, so it does make sense for us to look at it. Secondly, infidelity can happen to anyone, even psychology students and professionals. That's why we need to look at it, in case any of you listeners or readers need this information in the future, as this podcast episode could help you to heal, thrive and rebuild trust quicker compared to if you didn't have this information. Finally, if you're an aspiring or qualified clinical psychologist or another mental health professional, then there's a chance that you will come across infidelity in your clinical work. Therefore, this podcast episode might be a useful resource for you to think about in a therapy session. You can help your clients better, especially if you haven't encountered infidelity before. How to overcome infidelity. No one should ever deny that the healing process after infidelity is challenging, but the pain can be overcome and trust can be rebuilt using some knowledge. You need to validate and acknowledge your feelings after infidelity. Firstly, when it comes to infidelity, you need to validate and acknowledge your feelings, because you need to accept them, because it is okay to feel what you're feeling. You should always try to allow yourself to feel the full range of emotions that you're experiencing, like betrayal, sadness, anger, confusion, amongst others. Due to it is normal to have these sort of reactions in infidelity, because it is a confusing time, and infidelity should never happen. This is why it might be an idea to get support from a trusted friend or family member who can provide a safe space for you to express your emotions without judgment. Because, oh wow, I actually didn't know that this was in this podcast episode. Sorry, going back to the blog post. This is something that I've learned a lot about recently, since it's been 8 weeks since my sexual assault, and I've tried for so long not to allow myself to feel certain ways. I tried to force away the confusion, the anger, the hate, and the more assault-related emotions that infidelity doesn't bring up. Yet it did no good for me. It affected my mental health badly. It didn't help me heal, and it only prolonged my struggles. My point is that you need to allow yourself to feel your emotions. Otherwise, you will do real damage to yourself and your mental health in the long term. You cannot pretend everything is fine after infidelity. You need to allow yourself to grieve. I know we're only on the second point, but I'm realizing that there's a lot of overlap between overcoming infidelity and a lot of other mental health difficulties and negative experiences. So this is something we should all try and focus on and learn from, especially as infidelity can happen to anyone. As a result, infidelity is a loss, and you need to allow yourself to grieve the loss of trust, the lost future, and effectively the shattered dream that you and your partner had together. Also, you need to allow yourself to grieve for the relationship itself, because even if you work things out, it has still changed, and you will need to heal and go through the ups and downs too. Overall, you will need to give yourself time to heal at your own pace without suppressing your emotions or trying to rush this stuff. Personally, it is that rushing of the healing that my experience is the most damaging, and it causes a lot more stress. I have tried to rush my healing from my trauma of my assault, and I have tried to be okay, perfect, and like nothing has happened, so I can live a perfectly normal life again. Yet, this simply isn't possible, and that's okay, because I need to try and heal at my own pace. And the reason why there's a slight laughter in my tone when I'm reading out these personal bits was because I wrote this blog post in about May about May 2024, so almost like a year ago. And it's just interesting because I didn't know how bad my mental health was actually going to go later that year. So in hindsight, this is actually quite funny to read. After infidelity, you should self-respect. Considering that infidelity is all about loss, it might be a good idea to engage in some kind of self-reflection so that you can reflect on the relationship itself and any factors that contribute to the infidelity. This is and will always be about blaming yourself or your partner for what happened, but self-reflection can be helpful by identifying any vulnerabilities and personal patterns that might have existed within the relationship. Overall, if you're able to recognize these patterns and continue self-reflection, then this might be useful for personal growth and developing healthier relationships in the future. You need to take time for self-care. So at the time of writing this, I was rubbish at self-care and doing all the different things that you're meant to do as a part of that. However, you need self-care and look after yourself because you're likely to be going through a hurricane of different emotions. So you need to look after yourself too. You could focus on activities like exercise, hobbies, spending time in nature, or anything else that you enjoy. In addition, you should make sure your body is nourished with healthy food and have a good sleep pattern, as well as consider professional help to help you work through your emotions. Personally, as a part of self-care, I'm making sure that I'm being kind to myself when things pop up. I'm seeing friends a lot, and I'm doing things that make me happy, like writing, podcasting, and other psychology-related topics. You need to establish boundaries. When it comes to trying to rebuild trust, a key part of this is setting clear boundaries for your relationship and yourself. You could set boundaries in terms of guidelines on communication. You could talk about the need for both of you to go to a couples therapy, or have boundaries about the amount of transparency needed going forward. Boundaries are critical to overcoming infidelity, and because they help you create a sense of safety as well as security for yourself as you go through the healing process. Whilst I can't add too much to this section because I've never been in a relationship, I could actually change it. I could actually change this paragraph now, let alone experience infidelity. But I know that I'm glad to have a lot of boundaries in the future with any boyfriends or partners. I will have to have boundaries no matter what, and my boyfriend will have to understand that we cannot do certain things until I'm ready because of my assault. And if they can't respect that, then I'm going to have to kick them to the curb. At the end of the day, boundaries are about respect, and if your partner cannot respect you, especially after they've committed infidelity, then they don't deserve you. I think it's as simple as that. Have support and communicate with trusted others. So I would never ever want you to go through infidelity alone, because this will make your mental health suffer, it will cause you a lot of distress, and you cannot keep something as horrible as infidelity locked away inside you. Therefore, you would need to have to and reach out to your social support network of your friends and family, or a mental health professional if you need it. You can share your emotions, your thoughts, and your pain on with someone you would trust. Then this can help you to lessen the burden of infidelity. This is even more important if you and your partner decide to stay together, because you're going to have good, effective, and open communication. You're going to have to talk about how they hurt you, your boundaries, and your expectations of them going forward. The healing process can be seriously helped by developing clear and respectful communication so you can both understand each other. Whilst we can understand that effective communication is important for life in general, I want to stress here that respectful communication is critical in all relationships. For example, after what happened to me happened, I had two very clear experiences of communication. I tried to communicate what happened to my social environment, a polite way of saying it without naming names, and I was shut down. I wasn't listened to, and I did not feel supported whatsoever. It only negatively impacted my mental health. I hated it, and my distress was increased dramatically because of it. Whereas when I spoke to my friends, including my best friend, they listened to me, supported me, and made me feel valued. That was critical at this time, and is even more important now while moving forward in the healing process. Give yourself time to rebuild. Regardless of what you've been through, you need to give yourself time to heal and rebuild trust in people. It's taken me way too long to understand that, and I partly wish that I had understood how long things would take sooner, because I would probably have been further along in my healing if I had expected this time factor sooner. When it comes to infidelity, you need to realize that rebuilding trust is a slow process that takes patience, time, and consistency. You're not going to forgive your partner overnight, because that isn't how forgiveness works in this case. So you need to give yourself the time and space to heal and rebuild trust at your own pace. Moreover, if you're still with your partner, then watching their partners over time and looking for consistent efforts to rebuild your trust. For trust to be rebuilt, you will both need to be committed to communicating openly, addressing any underlying issues in the relationship, and being transparent with each other. That is the only way your relationship can improve. Conclusion. If you're someone who's experienced this when it comes to overcoming infidelity, the healing process will be challenging with the emotions, your confusion, and the lack of trust that you feel. Yet, if you have patience, open communication, and do self care, then it is very possible that you can overcome infidelity and you can rebuild your trust for future relationships. Also, your healing journey will be unique, and there isn't a time limit, so please just go at your own pace, as annoying as that might be. You need to heal at your own pace in overcoming the hardship of infidelity. If you're a listener or reader who has an experienced infidelity, then I hope that doesn't change, and I hope I never experience infidelity in the future. Yet this is still useful to know about in case if this does happen to us, our friends, or our family. If this does happen, then I hope that this podcast episode might be a useful resource for all of you. And if you encounter infidelity in your clinical work, then I hope that you now know that your clients can rebuild their life, their trust, and they can go on to have great relationships in the future. Something that probably seems flat out impossible in at the moment, an aftermath of infidelity. But It is so possible. It really is. So never give up on relationships, because they really can be amazing, especially after experiencing something as awful as infidelity. So I really hope that you enjoyed today's episode and you got something out of it. I know that I did, because it's always interesting looking back on podcast episodes from over a year ago, because I wrote these, I add my personal experience that I'm living in the moment, and it's just interesting to see how different I was back then. I had some different thoughts, I had some different feelings, because my rape had only just happened. But also, I didn't have my partner back then. So I still agree with 99% of that podcast episode though. I would probably just add a few more details about what it's like to actually be in a relationship these days. Or I would just try and add in that perspective. So really interesting, really useful, and I hope you enjoyed it. Speaking of which, if you know someone who would enjoy today's podcast episode, then please share it with them. I'm always really grateful when you wonderful people help spread the word about the podcast. And if you want to learn more, then please check out Psychology of Relationships, the social psychology of friendships, romantic relationships, and more, available in all the usual places. And if you want to support the podcast on a monthly basis, then please head on over to patreon.com/the Psychology World Podcast. Or if you want to support the podcast on a one-off basis, then please head on over to buymeacoffee.com/Connor Whiteley. So have a great day, everyone, and I'll see you next time. Found it helpful. Please remember to like the video and subscribe to the YouTube channel, and follow the podcast on your favourite podcast app. And if you wanted to learn more, then please check out the backlist of the podcast episodes or my books at conwhiteley.net. So have a great day, and I'll see you next time.